We take refrigeration for granted today, but for most of human history, people had to get creative to keep their food from spoiling. Long before refrigerators, supermarkets, and global trade, our ancestors found ways to store food for months, even years, using natural methods and simple materials. One of the most fascinating examples, storing grapes in unbaked clay containers. This technique dates back thousands of years and was commonly used along the Silk Road between 600 and 900 AD when traders transported goods from China to Europe. These clay containers acted like ancient portable refrigerators, keeping grapes cool and preventing moisture loss. Instead of loading up a truck or cart, traders would pack these clay pots onto camels and travel across deserts, ensuring the fruit stayed fresh for long journeys. But grapes weren't the only food that people preserved this way. Let's dive into some of the most ingenious food preservation methods used before modern refrigeration. Unbaked clay wasn't just used for grapes. In many parts of the world, people stored oil, wine, grains, and even water in similar clay pots. The porous nature of the clay allowed slow evaporation, which helped keep the contents cool, almost like a natural air conditioner. In places like ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, large clay jars were buried underground to keep food at a stable, cool temperature. The famous amphorae used by the Greeks and Romans were ceramic containers designed to store olive oil, wine, and grains, preventing spoilage even during long sea voyages. Before refrigeration, salt was one of the most effective ways to keep food from spoiling. It works by drawing moisture out of food, preventing bacteria from growing. People in ancient Egypt and Rome would cover meat and fish with layers of salt, allowing them to store it for months. Cheese making. Salt was also used in cheese production to remove excess moisture and prevent bacterial growth. Salted butter and lard. In medieval Europe, butter was packed in salt to make it last longer, and people stored lard in airtight jars to use for cooking year-round. Even today, salt curing is used in foods like prosciutto, salted cod, and pickled vegetables. Another ancient method of food preservation was drying and smoking. These techniques removed moisture from food, making it harder for bacteria and mold to grow. Sun-dried fruits and vegetables. In regions like the Middle East and North Africa, people would slice fruits like figs, dates, and apricots and leave them in the sun to dry. The result, naturally preserved snacks that could last for months without refrigeration. Smoking fish and meat. Indigenous cultures around the world, from the Americas to Scandinavia, smoked fish and meat over low fires. This not only preserved the food, but also added flavor. Dried pasta and grains. In Italy and other Mediterranean regions, wheat and grains were dried and stored in cool places, ensuring a stable food supply throughout the year. Ever heard of a root cellar? These underground storage areas were used before refrigeration to keep food cool year-round. In Europe and North America, people dug underground cellars where they stored potatoes, carrots, onions, apples, and even barrels of cider. The temperature remained cool and stable, keeping food fresh for months. In Mongolia and Central Asia, nomadic tribes stored meat and dairy in underground pits, using natural insulation from the earth. In the Middle East, people built qanats, underground water channels that also helped cool food storage areas. Today, some modern homesteaders still use root cellars to store fresh produce without electricity. While bacteria usually spoil food, some bacteria actually help preserve it. That's the idea behind fermentation, a method that has been used for thousands of years to preserve everything from vegetables to dairy and even beverages. Pickling vegetables. Ancient cultures in China and Eastern Europe stored cucumbers, cabbage, and other vegetables in brine, salt water, allowing natural bacteria to create sour, tangy flavors while preserving the food. That's how sauerkraut and kimchi were born. Wine and beer production. Fermentation was also used to preserve grapes and grains, turning them into alcoholic beverages that lasted far longer than fresh produce. Yogurt and cheese, dairy products would spoil quickly, so people in ancient Greece, India, and the Middle East learned to ferment milk into yogurt and cheese, extending its shelf life significantly. Fermentation wasn't just about preservation, it also improved nutrition, adding probiotics and making food easier to digest. Our ancestors had no refrigerators, yet they thrived for thousands of years using these techniques. Whether it was clay pots, salt, drying, underground storage, or fermentation, every culture developed unique ways to keep food fresh. Even today, many of these methods are still in use. Wine is still stored in clay barrels, pickles and cheese are still preserved through fermentation, and smoked meats are still a gourmet delicacy. So next time you grab something from your fridge, remember, people once had to get creative to make food last. And in some ways, they were masters of sustainability, using natural materials and simple methods that worked for centuries. Would you ever try living without a fridge for a month? Let me know in the comments.